Fountains. They may be the height of humanity's artistic creations, utterly beautiful, romantic, and tranquil. Well, most of them at least. I've always loved fountains, from the classical ones found in Rome and Paris to the more modern ones found all across the world today. Fountains are an especially cool type of sculpture because they're interactive. The cascading water invites you to walk around the fountain, hang out, maybe throw a penny or two in, maybe even take a swim. And I've always wanted to make a fountain, but with concrete and pumps, it can get pretty pricey. But I think I found a way to make a small fountain on a budget using some ceramic clay and a small fish tank pump. So without further ado, let's get sculpting. The first step to making a fountain is to make the large bowl that will be the bottom pool of the fountain. To do that, I'm going to use this large plastic bowl as a mold. I'm going to cut me off a slab of clay. This style of hand building with clay is called slab molding. You take a big old slab of clay and you roll it out. As you roll it out, roll from the middle out. It may take a good bit of muscle to roll it out since we're working with pretty big slabs. Rotate and flip the clay so that it rolls out into an even circle or square shape. Keep rolling until your clay starts to get around pinky thin. We're not quite pinky thin there, it's still a little too thick, so I'm going to keep rolling. The clay can be anywhere from pinky thin to pencil thin. It should not be any thicker or thinner, or will either be too thick and bulky or too thin and fragile. That right there is what we're looking for. So that the clay does not stick to the mold, I'm going to lay out some newspaper and I'm going to spray the mold with a light layer of cooking spray. The cooking spray acts as a mold release agent that will allow the clay to come out easily. Time to get the clay in the mold. The flat slab of clay will not naturally want to become a spherical bowl shape, so we have to help it by making some waves, some ripples, some kind of flower petal shapes around the edges. Those ripples will help the clay sink down into the mold, and then you can carefully press them back out flat against the walls of the mold, trying to create as smooth of a surface as possible without any wrinkles or folds. If you do get some wrinkles or folds, we can smooth those back out later. Then you can use a fettling knife or even a butter knife to trim off the edges. Any wrinkles can be fixed by taking a clay tool and making little stitch marks across the wrinkle and then smoothing it out. If your clay slab wasn't quite big enough for your mold, you may end up with a little chunk missing at the top of your mold. You don't have to redo the whole thing. You can fix this by cutting out a little patch of slab that fits in that empty spot, and then scratching up the clay down in the mold and scratching up that patch, dabbing it with a little bit of water, pressing it on, and stitching and smoothing. Good as new. You'd never even know that bowl was patched. Now I'll repeat those same steps with a smaller bowl for the second tier and an even smaller bowl for the third tier. Whew, all three bowls are done. Time to clean up the scrap. And whoa, Scrap Mountain is getting a little bit out of control. Let's recycle some of this clay. We can take this scrap clay, which is perfectly good, it just has some air bubbles in it, and we can bring it over to a solid work table here and begin kneading the air bubbles out. It may not be the most glamorous job in the world, but there's something therapeutic, maybe even meditative, about kneading the clay. Especially this part. Once all the air bubbles are out, I'll smash it back into a cube, and it's ready to be sculpted with again. Speaking of sculpting, my slab molded bowls have dried up just a bit and they're ready to come out of their molds. They may come out easily, or you may have to peel and coax them out just a bit. Once they come out, you can check and see if they have any plumber's crack. That would be any folds or wrinkles from the inside of your mold. You can stitch those up and smooth those out. A brush can be a great smoothing tool too. Just remember that whether you're smoothing with a brush or a finger, the key is a back and forth motion. Not too much water and not too much pressure. Too much water or too much pressure will damage your bowl. The bottom bowl for your fountain will need a rim. A rim is a decorative, thicker piece of clay that goes all the way around the edge of the bowl. One way to do this is by rolling out a coil of clay. Rolling out a large coil can be tricky because the clay will want to turn into an oval. If as you're rolling it starts to turn into an oval shape, find the high part of that oval and press it down so that it turns back into a circle, and then keep rolling. If a little fold or wrinkle starts to develop in your coil, you can always fix that by stitching. If your coil gets too long to roll out easily, you can cut it in half and keep rolling. You want your coil to be about index finger or marker thick. That'll be just a little bit thicker than the walls of your bowl. Measure out your coils so that they go all the way around your bowl and overlap a little bit where they meet. Trim off any extra. Then scratch up the top of the bowl. Scratch up the belly of the coils. Dab with water. And press your coils on, letting them hang just a little bit to the outside of the bowl. As you work with your bowl, if it starts to feel like it's getting weak and needs some support, you can always put it down inside a smaller bowl, and that will help support the curvature at the bottom of the bowl. As you stitch and smooth your rim to the inside of your bowl, you'll need to support your bowl on the outside with the other hand. This will keep your bowl from warping or falling apart. You do not have to stitch your rim to the outside of your bowl. That seam may actually look kind of cool and decorative, but you may have to smooth it out just a bit. And that simple coil rim is done. But there are many other types of rims. For example, you could mold little balls of clay, cut off chunks of coil, even mold up little teardrop shapes to attach to the rim of your bowl instead of a coil. You could even take thin coils and twist them up or braid them into little pieces and line the rim of your pot with those. The possibilities are endless, but no matter what shapes you sculpt up, they will not stick to your bowl unless you follow these 3 steps. You must always scratch the bowl and the piece you're putting on the rim, dab with water, and press on firmly. For my bowl, I'm going to mold up some little teardrop or flower petal shapes and attach those all the way around. The final petal. That took a little bit of work, but it turned out looking great. Remember, you can always smooth up little detailed things with the brush. All right, the big bowl is done. Now it's time to move on to the second tier of the fountain. But first, let me show you something. Water does not run straight off the edge of a bowl. It tends to cling and run down the side of it, which is not really what we want in a fountain. What we need is a little spout that allows the water to fall straight down. So on the second tier of the fountain, we're going to have to sculpt some little spouts. Figure out how many spouts you want and make sure that they're evenly spaced. Make a little mark to make sure that you're happy with the locations before you begin sculpting them. To sculpt them, I'll put a little bit of water on my fingertips and kind of start just pinching the rim, thinning it out, running my finger back and forth, basically eroding a little spout into that clay. Meanwhile, the other hand supports the clay around that spout so that the rest of the bowl doesn't start to fall apart or get messed up. As you sculpt your spouts, you may find that in one area there's not really enough clay to get a good spout, so you can scratch that area up, get a little chunk of clay, dip it in water, and smash it on to add clay into that area so that you have enough clay to get a good spout. You can add a coil rim first before you make your spouts. This would be an especially good idea if your rim seems thin or dry. Go ahead and put a fresh coil of clay on there, and that will make the spouts much more easy to sculpt. Remember to scratch up the area and add a little chunk of clay as needed so that you have enough clay to really sculpt up a nicely shaped spout. After you sculpt your spouts, you can still add details onto the rim. I'm going to continue with the kind of petal, teardrop shapes that I had on the bottom tier, but for an added detail, I'm going to have the ends of the teardrop twist and angle towards the spout. I will form up each one of those shapes with my fingers and then scratch it, dab with water, press it on to attach, and smooth it out with a brush. And the second tier of the fountain is done. Time for the top tier. The top tier is going to be pretty much the same as the second tier, except just smaller with 3 spouts. Beautiful. And now all 3 tiers of my fountain are done. The next step will be to make the stands that go in between each tier, but I will work on that later. I'm done for today. So it's time for you to get busy and make your molds, make your rims, make your spouts. Let's do it.